Just before we get started, right, I just wanted to tell you that I've got a new series that's now available called Truth Seeking. That's TROOF. There's a link to it in the link tree below. It's me and a comedian from the UK called Jimmy Budd just discussing various conspiracy theories. We'd love to know what you think about it. We'd love to know that there's people listening. You're right, guys. I'm the world around you, and this is Pause for Thought on Threshold FM. And this week's show, this is a suggestion from someone in the world around you's Discord server, who they wanted an episode on the supernatural experiments and the hidden bases of the Nazis. Now it's been difficult. It's an hard one. It took me a few days. I've not put as much time into this as I did the fucking Pokemon special, but it's hard stuff to find lots of different things about without reading actual books for this week, because that's not something I've got time for at the minute, which I'd like to. Obviously, it's always nice to be able to sit down and try and read something and get you to grips with something nicely, but I've been elbow deep in rats harvesting testicles and lungs, something that I can easily imagine, would have happened in some of the weird and twisted experiments by the Nazis, except they would have been doing it with people rather than with rats and that. Anyway, not something I want to really affiliate myself with. Obviously, they were doing that before they fled to South America and got jobs working for some of the largest corporations and organisations in America. But before Operation Paperclip saved some of what would become the objectively the best, is that the right way to say it? The objectively best Nazis. I mean, that feels in itself that could be a soundbite, but productive, the most productive ones, those most productive SS people. Functional. The high functioning Nazis. Maybe it still sounds a little bit soundbitey, but anyway, the ones that were good at the jobs anyway. So before they got picked up by the American Secret Service and the Russians, did the actual smart ones manage to escape to the moon in one of several massive rockets during a stormy night in the mid-1940s? Well, let's have a song that kind of could be seen to have something to do with Nazis in a way, with tenuous links to the titled substance that supposedly turns people into zombies, which kind of gets us to Nazis in a weird way. This is Bath Salts by DMX, Jay-Z and Nas. Now, before we look at if they could go to the moon, though, I thought it might be fun to look at what weird weapons they were trying to make, sort of ease our way into it kind of thing, because we know in COD that they had things that were called the Wunderwaffe, but did they actually in real life? Now, it's kind of disappointing in a way, though I guess if it wasn't disappointing, there's a good chance that I'd be saying Sie sind zufriedenstellend, which of course means they were satisfactory, which is very German. And so there were no lightning guns to speak of, no alien ray blasters neither that we're aware of. So we have to assume that they bundled them into the rockets in order to fight off the inhabitants of the moon, the Martians and the Venetians. So could that be why Elon's fired one of his cars into space, if that was real? Was it to show the civilization of Nazis on the moon, the most recent version of his card, as if to say, look at what we can do now? We'll have you in a fight, you know, if you come back here, we'll fucking have you. Now, we can't be too sure, because I've heard people say that car going into space was all just CGI and it actually never happened. Now, the closest that we get to a lightning gun in Nazi time, in Nazi science, is a sun gun, the Sonnengewehr. So obviously, you wear Gewehr in a lot of World War II games. I'm guessing that just means gun, because Sonnen means sun, so sun gun. It was a proposed weapon, right, that never made it to fruition, if you like, because the Nazis apparently told the Americans it could take about 70 to 100 years to complete it. Now, though, others have suggested it could be finished in half the time if they were to just fire up loads of different satellites into the sky. Now, we've got to bear in mind there that there is the chance that Elon has actually potentially made his own Sonnengewehr there, though, because hasn't he just fired loads of fucking satellites into the sky? So if he was to use them to fucking fire down the sun's rays, he could fucking do something. But I've gotten ahead of myself here, so it's not, the Sonnengewehr isn't quite the weapon of Helios 1 in Fallout New Vegas, for those of you that had a PlayStation in what I would say is probably the heyday of gaming. But it's not far off, because the idea that they could have built a space station in the sky, like a fucking massive one, with fucking loads of reflector panels that could be moved all in unison together and aim a beam of focused sunlight in order to boil a sea, evaporate garden ponds, or possibly set fire to loads of houses in California. But then apparently, they never got round to it. So, which that's also a lot of what their mega weapons seem to be, innit? Failures. Which isn't something that you really associate with Germans. I mean, you do associate with the Nazis because most of their portable weaponry were just lies spread by their literal propaganda department or the Ministry of Propaganda that was led by Goebbels. Whilst a lot of the ones that were completed weapon-wise turned out to be either pretty shit or almost impossible to use in the field. Now, the reasons why it were bad is because it just took too long to make them, meaning that most of them would be incomplete when the Russians or the other Allied forces had come and find them. One example, though, of a weird wheeled weapon is the Kugelpanzer, which is something that looks like it would have definitely fit into the Star Wars universe, because if you can remember those droids that used to roll around in the Phantom Menace, I don't think they may have been in Clone Wars as well, but I've seen Phantom Menace more times. Right, and the ones that could bang a shield around themselves, and then fire them guns. Like 2 guns on either hand. Like it was like they also kind of looked like the sort of dog-like monsters in Abe's Odyssey, I guess, in a weird way. Which you've got to then question: is Abe's Odyssey there a way of getting into our heads the symbology of whatever these dog hybrid creatures of the Scrag and whatever else Scarab and Scrag were? If they were also in the Phantom Menace and Star Wars. Because I would argue that Abe's Odyssey was a fucking massive game, and still is to this day a massive gaming universe. Star Wars is a fucking huge thing. So they're trying to get these ideas into us. Oh, was one of them copying the other? It's, again, we don't really know because I haven't really looked into it. But imagine them droids in Star Wars Phantom Menace just without the guns, the shield, or the maneuverability of the droidka, which does actually sound kind of German, droidka, or droideka, or at least like it's based on the Germanic languages. So maybe that's something that we got to learn from Star Wars there, because surely Star Wars has got sort of nods towards Nazis, because of the capes, because of the clothes, do you know what I mean? But I'm not overly sure. Now, these one-man tanks were spherical with 2 tracks on the outside, and they reckon that the engine was inside it and all, which seems like a bit of an oversight, whilst they also had a tiny little slot to look out of because they were a reconnaissance vehicle. And I suppose if the engine fumes didn't kill you whilst you were on your reconnaissance mission, then enemy gunfire was probably going to, because it boasted armour of 5mm thick, which is, for those of you that aren't massively aware of millimetres, if you got maybe 3 5p's stacked on top of each other, maybe 2 5-pence pieces stacked on top of each other would give you about 5mm. Now I don't know what it was made out of because I couldn't find that out, but 5mm doesn't seem too thick. But reconnaissance, you're probably sneaking around, and can you really sneak around in a tank that's made into a ball, which I imagine is going to fucking echo the sound of the engine inside because it's just a metal ball with an engine inside. For those of you that were wondering, I've got little to no idea what it means, but I think it was from memory, it was a 1-cylinder 2-stroke engine. So I don't know if that means anything to anyone listening. If you can explain to me in the chat if that seems like a practical vehicle or not, that'd be nice. But with the 5mm armour anyway, like that's, bullets are getting through in it. That's the point I'm making. It seems like shit, or it's just gonna fucking cave in and you'll never be able to get out of it again because it'd be so dented. Maybe they had to cut you out when you got to where you were going. But then if you got to where you were going, you'd be spying, and then it's not gonna go around in a straight line anymore because it's dented. I don't know how you would use it in it. You just fucking either choke to death. Well, you'd probably choke to death in 2 ways. You either choke to death on the fumes, or you gurgle yourself to death in a ball-shaped bath full of your fucking own blood. And I would imagine piss as well, because you're not getting out of there for the toilet. Your sandwiches are getting ruined. They're just getting kind of roasted in there with you. Now, strangely though, they seem to believe that's they as in researchers and not the big they. The big they probably don't want us talking about these sorts of things at all. But either way, and by saying that, while I'm doing the recording here for my Patreon on YouTube, I have had it actually cut out 3 times already, which is weird. That's never happened before. But either way, they seem to believe it was to be shipped to Japan, and in order to be used there. I don't know if it was. I'm guessing to be used by the Japanese, because the Japanese and the Germans were affiliated with one another. But the one existing Kugelpanzer was found in Manchuria, which many people will realise and recognise from the film, where it's quite prominent as the setting. Spike Island, you know that one about the Stone Roses. Now, one weapon that seems to be a bit crazy, if you like, is the Krumlauf. It's an assault rifle with a bent barrel. Perfect, right, for friendly fire or shooting blindly round slight bends that you for some reason can't see around. Now, I honestly, looking at it, I can't imagine how you'd aim it, because I thought the whole idea of rifling a barrel was so that the bullet will follow the line of the inner barrel. So if your barrel's at an angle, won't it just follow that trajectory and carry on sort of bending, like in fucking Wanted? It won't. It's not just going to go in a straight line at a bend, I wouldn't have thought, because I don't think it follows the direction that I don't think it follows the direction the whole point's in anyway. But I suppose the Nazis did a lot of mental things, so I guess to pick them apart because of a weird gun seems a bit like I might be nitpicking to a degree. Anyway, let's have a song. This is Heaven and Hell by Fat Joe and Dre. Proper like the sample in that, innit? Because I'm sure it's on another song as well. And you know, a bit off topic and a bit topical really for this show, but I heard a J. Cole song the other day on the radio where the chorus was lines from a Pharaoh Munch song, which I thought was weird. But anyway, getting back into the Nazis and that, there are weapons that haven't actually been seen, but have been reported on by many alternative historians and fringe scientists, like a machine known as Die Glock, which I'm guessing looks like a bell jar, because or glosh, it might be glosh, Gloche, because that's a glosh, innit, a cloche. I think that's what you call them, a bell jar. Bell jars are the kind of things that you would put bad taxidermy into, which is available from worldaroundyou.com. And this weapon though itself was actually referred to as the bell by English-speaking people, so there's a good chance that's actually what Glock means, or glosh means. It's Gloche, so it's probably glosh in German. But this piece of technology seems somewhat related to the technology discussed by Michael Tallinger in his talks, except it's about 2,000 years out of time, which makes sense because the Glosh is also a time machine. So that explains how it could have made its way into the 20th century from the ancient Egyptian times. Now, Tallinger speaks of a machine that used the vibration of the earth, or the natural ring of the earth itself, which could explain why this is called the bell by some, because it apparently had anti-gravity properties alongside the previously mentioned, time travel capabilities, whilst also having the potential to give the user free unlimited energy. But if someone had discovered a free unlimited energy source to rival the, at the time, internationally cornered petroleum markets by the American powerhouses, hence, we just had in between World War One and World War Two, or maybe it was at the end of I think it was World War One and World War Two. In between there, they had prohibition, so they'd really cornered the oil markets and that there. So the Americans really aren't going to want a free energy source. So the Glosh would be, I would imagine, at the top of their list. But anyway, the people behind it would have probably been would have got suicided by the big they, maybe in weird or compromising circumstances, But you could argue that if such a discovery had been made, you would then muddy the name of the inventor or people associated with the discovery. Now, I'm in no way trying to detract from what the Nazis did, but they weren't the only country to have people in camps in World War II. Now, from my understanding, the Americans were also putting Japanese people into concentration camps in America, and those were people that were born in America who just happened to be of Japanese descent. Anyway, we're not going to dwell on that, because obviously the Nazis really tortured and killed their people that they kept in their camps, whereas I don't know if the Americans did or not. Not really something for us to dwell on, but it's something that I think, people should probably be aware of. Now, another thing, weird looking thing that the Nazis made was something called the Syncropter, which was a type of helicopter where the blades spun in different directions. They just look like they wouldn't fly though when you see a picture of it. And some of the other helicopter stuff I've seen when researching for this, they kind of look like they'd just be made for that Red Bull event where they just fucking run off a cliff, or run off the artificial cliffs, Maybe even the downhill soapbox races as well, a few of the things. Now, we haven't really touched on the supernatural experiments yet, so we're going to look into the secret bases first, I guess. They seem to be a little bit more than like a child's treehouse, though they do put them in some risky places. Maybe more like maybe they're more akin to a pervert's viewing ledge in a tree. There was one base, right, that was found by Russians in the Arctic. It got abandoned in 1944, so before the end of the Second World War. But since then, apparently it's been taken on by the Russians. But what were they searching for? Well, some people would suggest that they were searching for food most of the time, because most, if not all, of the inhabitants of the base got killed by a polar bear. But a little like the tent at Dialatov Pass, there's a little bit more to it, and they were destroyed, much like that tent, from the inside out. Not in a metaphorical sense, like there was a conscientious Nazi, though I guess if there were going to be some conscientious Nazis and they wanted to keep them alive for whatever reason, then you probably would have sent them to the Arctic as some form of punishment, and to maybe scare the others into compliance. But no, not that. Nothing that deep. Turns out, right, they were poisoned by the polar bear. It snuck in the night and sprinkled arsenic into the cutlery drawer, and then as the Nazis caught the bear and ate it, they all died, mate, in mysterious circumstances. Some people, though, have proposed that the base was used by the Germans to search for ancient relics because they were allegedly obsessed, with the occult, and there was a lot of things around the occult. And I've been watching videos and reading about them and that, and it seems like it was propaganda on both sides of the war, if you like. Like the Nazis used propaganda to coerce their population into hating who they wanted them to hate, to fight and invade neighbouring countries, and to also convince them that the futures were somewhat predestined by the stars themselves. Because they would use astrology and fake astrology to manipulate each other. Like both sides, the Allied and the Axis, would do that, which was, well, the Axis being the Germans, and that they would use astrology thinking it was real, whilst also using fake astrology in order to convince one another to do stuff, and also to convince the populace. Whilst then you had the Allies found that out, and they would use astrology to try and convince them with what would be deemed, I guess, fake astrology, I don't know, just made up to purposely make them make decisions and act on things that they otherwise wouldn't have done or acted on, but because they thought the stars were telling them to, they would do it, which is weird that that's what it resorted to. But he's just an odd. I don't understand. Like I don't get how that can be a part of warfare. Like what part of the war are you going? They're using the stars. If you notice as well that they're using the stars to guide themselves and to give themselves ideas for the future, then is there not some form of truth behind astrology, if that's the case? But I mean, I don't know. I don't know much about it, innit? But because anyway, it seems like the Allies found out about this, and that they started to do it as well. Like they weren't doing it initially, and the Germans were like, "Oh, look at this astrology stuff here. Fucking Mystic Meg's fucking done it again, mate." Although I don't know if Mystic Meg would be German. You'd have like, Mystic Hans, maybe Mystic Hans. I don't know any. I really can't think of any German names. Is Greta a German name? Gretel, Mystic Gretel. I don't know. Anyway, it could all be though that it was Russian propaganda, and we learn that a Russian as well discovered with the star stuff anyway, because I did learn that a Russian discovered Peenemünde rocket base, and at the time saw fucking about a few huge fucking big spaceships take off towards the cloudy rain-filled sky. So could that have been Russian propaganda to make people still hate them, to make them think they've gone to the moon? Because other Russian officials later on in time, like maybe 30, 40 years later in the 90s, 50 years later in the 90s, are quoted as saying, to the best of our knowledge, those rockets never touched back down on Earth. So where did they go? Now, did they go into the hollow earth, or did they go to the moon? Well, some people believe both, but let's focus on the moon, at least for now. And it seems to be something that's in the zeitgeist. The first time it was publicly mentioned is in a book in 1947, so approximately, 3 years after it was seen happening? Then you've got a story by Philip K. Dick that says that they went to Mars, Venus and the moon. Now that's fiction, innit? But there are rumours that Philip K. Dick's books used to come to him in some form of ethereal download into his brain, possibly seeing hidden things from the real world or other possible, realms, futures, timelines, I don't know what you would call it. We can't be too sure, though, if what he was experiencing was real, and it's difficult to make a confident statement about it, to be honest. But, whilst we are in the worlds of what ifs, what if Hitler didn't actually have a Charlie Chaplin moustache? What if he was actually just a fellow with a hole in his face, and it was never caught well on camera because of the camera technology at the time? They were like, focus on rockets, we don't need colour film. Just we don't need colour film, but we just need black and white pictures, and we can kind of hide his face, and when they pretended, that it was facial hair, and could he and Charlie Chaplin, another wildly influential person of the 20th century with similar so-called quote-unquote facial hair, could they actually be some form of species of alien, or something fucking maybe not an alien, but there could be something there. And there have been more of them, arrive on Earth, or come out from the subterranean dwellings on Earth, or come out from the hollow Earth, or maybe they're the reason for the uncanny valley thing that supposedly is a thing in people, where you see a person that looks like a person, but there's something about them that's not quite right. But our brains are also now hardwired. If you see a picture of a person's face and the mouth's upside down, or the eyebrows or the eyes are upside down, our brains readjust it. So could that be, have we been conditioned to evolve that so we don't no longer notice the holes in people's faces from, like Charlie Chaplin and Hitler, And could more of these people, though, or things, could they be more prevalent now in today's society suddenly, out of nowhere? And that's the real reason why we spent the past year wearing masks all the time. Could the predictions of the Nazi, Werner von Braun, could his predictions of invisible enemies and alien invasions be literal, and to cover it up? Or could it be to protect the world from panic? Because and that's why they've released this virus of sorts. I mean, all of that's purely conjecture, though. I wouldn't like to speculate. It's not based on any form of fact. It's just some things I've been thinking. Now, one thing about Nazi occultism is that it seems to be heavily linked with German folklore, which makes sense, I guess. But Goebbels, right, he apparently thought that he could use German mysticism in order to influence the entire world, almost as if he was completely unaware that different places could have different cultures. And maybe it's weird that he wanted to everywhere to have the same culture, which I think seems very strange, to want everywhere to think the same and do the same and have the same culture and all believe that one thing is right and everything and other things are wrong. Because that's now at the moment, that seems to be what people seem to want, at least on the internet. Everyone wants this one overriding culture and everything should be like this, not like this. You should think that. And it seems a little bit a little bit Goebbels-esque, a little bit Gobbles. Okay, obviously I want to do the Timmy's the Turkey impression of Gobbles, but I mean, this is just nonsense. Anyway, I think that want for German mysticism kind of it did seem to work, but it affected one of their own as well by the name of Rudolf Hess. Now, it affected him a little bit more than it did their people, I think, because I'm sure I've read or I've heard somewhere that he tried to make it to Scotland and he skydived or parachuted into Scotland or Wales or England. He came over here anyway, into some hilled area, and parachuted down with a thing, I think like covered in runes in that, and tried to have a magical battle with, I think it was Aleister Crowley, but I think he was just arrested. I think, now I could be wrong, but I think it was MI5 that captured him when he landed, but I could be wrong though, as I say, and I don't mind if I'm wrong. I think this is definitely an episode where I should be putting my hands up and saying, if I'm wrong about any of this, I could be. But getting back to this Goebbels and his propaganda machine. It wasn't like a literal machine, like a hand crank steampunk machine, which is probably what they would want you to believe. It's more like an organisation, a bit more of it was a ministry, which is quite Orwellian sounding, isn't it? And by using the guise of mysticism as well, they could excuse all of their weird sort of occult practices as a form of mental science. Things like radiesthesia, where they would look for minerals by using metal rods, like when those middle-aged women do when they walk around parks trying to speak to ghosts in fields, but they just end up saying, there's no ghosts there. I think there's just water underground. It's impacting on my readings, and anyway, one cool bit of propaganda though is how they played to the German beliefs of werewolves to a degree. I've found some stuff where Germans believed that werewolves were a positive thing, and how the Germanic werewolves were at war with the Slavic vampires on the Eastern Front. So much so that, according to some people, that's why they had the werewolf partisan unit, which I wish I'd known about from my werewolf episode, which was very early on in all this. But it is mad though, innit, though, how there is links between all of this stuff that I'm looking into. And I keep telling you this, there's links to everything, and you just need to find the links between stuff, and then all of a sudden the world just starts to make more sense, mate. Now, I have read some stuff about this werewolf partisan unit, but it seems to have had very little to do with literal wolfmen, and it's just a name that they came up with. But some people who've wrote books and that seem to believe it did actually have something to do with werewolves and vampires, and I wouldn't mind reading those books, innit? And I am going to start adding them to a little Amazon wish list, and if people who listen to the shows want to, fucking get a little book that'll add to the shows and stuff, then, fucking feel free, but I'm not going to... I don't think I'd read it if I bought it, but I'd feel guilted into reading them if other people was like, I got you this book to read, as a little gift, yeah. But anyway, if you didn't already think that Hitler, right, was probably a difficult person to be around, he also gave himself a nickname as well, which is weird. He gave himself the nickname of Wolf, or Wolf, probably Wolf, because I don't know what it would be in German. And I think, right, if someone gives themselves a nickname, innit, they're probably the worst sort of person to know. And as far as the Werewolf unit, so Wolf would be Wolf. I just got to the next page of notes. I wrote it down in German there. Werewolf was the Werewolf, the werewolf unit. Wrote it phonetically though, so I could be wrong. It seems like Goebbels though was just kind of blowing smoke up his own arse, tickling his own bumhole, because then he started having his own radio show called Werewolf Radio, which was just a weird way to try and make the Germans and people taken in by Nazi sentiments to attack and kill any of the Allied forces that they find or see in the towns. So unfortunately, I feel like it's a kind of a dead end and not particularly informative, which I don't really like. And that's actually what's happened with a lot of this stuff that I've been researching this week for this. I feel like I've hit a lot of dead ends. I feel kind of like the internet's changed, but maybe just searching all of this stuff has changed me, guys? I'm trying to make this sound deeper than what it is, but I don't know why this one was so hard to look into. There used to be loads of conspiracy stuff everywhere about stuff like this, but I just can't find it, and I look, and I really look, and I can't find it or see it, or the people that I do find that talk about it just seem fucking boring, or they put it across in a way that I don't understand. Hopefully I put it across in a way that you can understand. I'm hoping that I'm making all of this easier to grasp and get your head around. Now, this next bit might not be exactly Nazi science, but kind of got adopted by the Nazis. There was this theory called the World Ice Theory, which was, for want of a better phrase, literally thought up by a bloke called Hans Horbriger, who was staring at the moon one night and decided that the moon wasn't in fact made from solidified cow excretions, but was instead made of solidified ice, water, just ice blocks. He claims he'd always known deep down that Isaac Newton was wrong about gravity, and that the strength of the sun's gravity and that his own, as in Hans's own glacial cosmology, proved that Isaac was a shit scientist and inevitably just full of shit. Because you could look at it one way in that, realistically, if you look at what we're told, Isaac was suffering from a concussion from being hit in the head by a tree, by an apple. He was viciously attacked, basically, by a tree, and the apple hit him on the head, and then he went, gravity exists because there's a fucking molten core in the earth, and that's what happens with the sun as well. The sun's like a molten core, but we're floating around in this ether around it all, but in the planet we don't have an ether around it all, because we can't be telling people about the hollow earth. Everyone's got to know that the earth is solid, but in the middle of it there's magma, which is actually really magnetic and drags apples towards your scalp. Right? which makes fucking no sense at all. But then you've got Hans, who's there like, oh yeah, fucking the glacial cosmology, these blocks of ice floating around in the sky, yeah, and they fucking crack off one of each other. And then that makes new planets, and when they already hit planets that they're already orbiting, it gives them new continents, mate. And this is what science should be, mate. This is exactly what science should be. Just blokes with a spare Tuesday making stuff up and then convincing other people that it's true. Because how is any of that any different to any so-called scientists that we know today? The only difference is that modern-day propaganda is peddled in schools to children to convince them that science explains the world, or that God explains the world, and that it's definitely one or definitely the other, that there's no in-between unless you believe in religion, and therefore listen when the Pope amends the international beliefs of billions of people, and in fact alters the Bible to include new bits to accommodate for scientific discoveries. But is this just because science has become more accessible than religion? Because science has been a lot more accepting of people than religion ever has. I mean, it's invented fridges so that people can eat shellfish and pork, and you know, it's invented condoms and investigated blood diseases so that more people can enjoy a more open sex life. But is it just a matter of what people believe that makes it all true? For example, if 3/4 of the world believe that so-called facts of the photosynthesis, dilemma, let's call it, now does that make it true? Until, 100 years later, where it's all explained away by using allegory about miniaturized Uber Eats drivers transporting energy drinks up the plant to allow it to eat whilst it lounges about in a field. It's hard to tell. Let's have a song. This is First in Flight by Black Alicious. World ice theory explains the universe away by saying that these blocks of floating ice moving around throughout the universe, and that when they crash into each other, that's how planets are formed. Now that's explaining it very briefly, innit? But one interesting thing though is that the world ice theory ties into the Great Flood, which again somehow manages to wangle its way into every single episode I think I've ever done. But by having ties to the Great Flood, it also made it appeal to Hitler, because these great floods, these tied in with the theosophical beliefs of the 7 races. Now, one of those races is the Aryans. Now, I'll be dead honest, this week's research is weird because, as I keep saying, you watch videos and that, and you listen to people talk about it all, but then when you go and read about it on the internet and that, it's almost like all the crazy mental stuff, the fun stuff, the weird stuff has been removed off the internet or possibly censored and changed or edited, and it doesn't sound as mental. I mean, it's not as much fun to it. Do you know what I mean? So has it been censored? Or I mean, what does that mean? Because I guess some might say that it means that these people are making things up, but it could also mean that they're onto something, and they, as in the big they, are trying to stop people from believing in world ice theory. So I'll do my bit. I'll tell you what I can about it, and I'll do my bit, to get the information out there, down into your brains through your ear holes, just whispering into your ears, just whispering my nonsense of world ice theory. Excuse me, love, have you heard of ice? You have. Do you know that we all come from the water? You do. Evolution's wrong. We don't all come from the water because of evolution. We come from water because of the world ice theory. Now, it was invented, as I said, by the dreamer Hans Horbiger, who believed that the frost giants had something to do with the crashing of many other orbiting frozen satellites, but these cosmic collapses led to the disappearance of Atlantis itself. The science itself stemmed from a dream he had, but he wasn't the only dreamer. He wasn't the only one. One of Hans's believers, by the name of Bellamy, also used to dream about the moon. He would say that as a kid, he'd dream about this massive moon that would spiral towards the Earth, and then he'd wake up feeling sick. Bellamy later he looked at the moon through a telescope and thought it looked very familiar. WIT confirmed. Possibly. Maybe. Maybe he was being molested in his sleep by a fat guy. Maybe there was some form of carbon monoxide poisoning. But I'm not here to cast dispersions, guys. Now, earlier on I did mention the 7 races and how the world ice theory adds credence to the Aryan idea, but there's more to this than the Hitler ideals of finding a bunch of good-looking blokes for him to cuddle up to at night. Aryans would be the 5th root race according to theologians. Theosophites, not theologians, Theosophites, I think they would call themselves. Now, from the beginning, we've got the ethereal Polarians, then it was the Hyperboreans. So Polarians were ethereal light beings, if you like. Hyperboreans, I imagine they've got something to do with woodlands or trees. Lemurians, something to do with apes and lemurs. Atlanteans, I imagine something to do with water. And then the Aryans. Airy? I don't know. You lose the link there for what Aryan actually links to. I ain't got a clue. But now, we haven't actually experienced the sixth root race yet, because they're prophesied to arise in the 28th century, somewhere in California. And the final instalment of the root race, Heptology, doesn't have a fixed release date, guys. It's like the Clerks 3 of the Theosophical world. But we do know that the 7th instalment will take place on a new continent that will rise up in the Pacific Ocean. Then there's never going to be an 8th root race, because it's now widely accepted amongst these people that, amongst most people, that the eighth piece of a franchise is usually just the 8th installment, just a cash grab in it, really. So the known human race will suffer a reboot on the planet Mercury, and it's going to take a less materialistic approach, meaning probably less action figures and more digital content like wallpapers and that. Maybe we'll see the reprise of 8-bit ringtones. Who knows? The group that seems to be responsible for a lot of the rumours about the Nazi occultism, or at least the extremes of Nazi occultism, is a group supposedly called Anunnaki, which probably mispronounced. I'll spell it for you so you can Google it though. That's A-H, N for November, E, N for November, E, R, B for Barry, E. And now that ties Germans as well to subterranean cities, which I imagine will make some of the listeners happy, maybe specifically Jimmy, if Jimmy's listening. He loves a good subterranean dweller. Now, specifically, right, this links him to the Tibetan subterranean cities where they believed that the last remaining Aryans, I need to pick pronunciations and stick with it. Basically, where the 5th root race stems from. Or at least, their genetically closest living ancestors lived. But you got to wonder if this was all just part of Goebbels' propaganda machine as well, because world-renowned mentalist Heinrich Himmler wanted to forge his own religion, which would overtake, in his eyes, Christianity and take over the world. And you've got to imagine how him and Goebbels would have to have a sort of scratch my back and I'll scratch yours sort of policy, because without that sort of mentality, I can imagine that all these guys would constantly be at each other's throats, like fucking trying to overtake each other to be better in Hitler's eyes or whatever. But from what I've been reading, it's almost like Hitler wasn't properly in charge of them anyway. It's just like Hitler was like he was like the public face of it, and all the rest of them were just like, I'm going to do this. And he was like, yeah, all right, yeah. And the other guys were like, well, if he's doing that, I'm doing this. And they're like, oh, yeah. And then Mengele was like, oh, I'm going to abduct twins and children and torture them. Like, all right, yeah. Well, if you're doing that, don't do it anywhere near us, all right? But not to say that they were all like looking down on each other, but I think they kind of were, because they were all trying to outdo each other, and it was kind of like they were trying to outdo each other with who could do the most mental stuff as well, or who could have the craziest idea and see it through to the end. It's just bizarre, mate. It's almost like someone's gone through the history of it and gone, well, we'll remove this bit because that gives that context, this bit gives that bit a bit of context, and we won't. I'll tell you what, we'll tell them this bit's definitely important, people need to know that, so that never happens again. We don't want to even really give them the ideas of this, so if we remove the links from that, but we'll tell them that they were doing this, but not really explain why, because then people might think, well, if that's why they're doing it, But just as a theory, I don't know if that's got any weight behind it. But anyway, like these guys, they were always trying to outdo each other, but I imagine that they must have been trying to be kind of pally, like helping each other out, because you wouldn't want to be getting in each other's faces in case one of them tried to unleash their legion of super soldiers onto the other one. Now, it's weird because a lot of Nazi stuff seems to tie into Marvel storylines. Like, we've got time travel, which ties into Endgame, and that in Endgame they go back in time and down their own timeline and alter their own timeline in order to affect their own timeline, which makes a new timeline, which So could that have happened with the Glosh? Could they have been doing that and just been trying to control their own timeline, but using another person's timeline in order to affect what they needed to happen? I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of other stuff like the super soldier stuff, the super soldier serum. There's different bits, the psychic powers and that. We're going to get into in a minute, very soon. I just find it weird that a lot of Marvel storylines seem to tie into it. But I guess though, when Marvel stories and DC stories were being written, there was probably a lot of stories coming back from people that had been to war, and the sort of, would Pulp Fiction have been a thing then? Not like Tarantino's film, but literal Pulp Fiction of different stories put into a magazine on cheap paper and that, and fucking sold around. And would there have been stories about the Nazis and what they were doing, and even if they were fictitious, just to get, tickle people's brains a little bit and get them, worked up still, kind of thing? Because, they love a good scrap, don't they, the Americans? They want to, well, maybe not the American people, but they like a good fucking let's have them angry at someone kind of thing. But I think it's weird that a lot of the Nazi stuff seems to connect in one way or another to Marvel stories. There are a lot of fucking general media at the minute anyway, and it's weird considering how there are like links as well between potential businesses, well, potential links, let's say, between the businesses involved with Marvel and the Nazis that were taken under America's wing during Operation Paperclip. But that's besides the point. There are other connections to the Nazis in recent popular culture as well. I recently watched a program on Netflix called Jupiter's Legacy. Now, as a program, I can give you a quick summary of that program. It's a program where a group of people went to Netflix and said, I've wrote a 12-part series. I'd love to have it made. I've got this great idea for a story. This is what happens in it. There's superheroes and they've got these powers, and then there's the children are getting these powers now, and they're going to overtake them, and they're going to lose their powers, and then the children will be in charge of it all, and they kind of rule the world, and and Netflix went, yeah, in my opinion, Netflix went, yeah, great idea. Can you fit that into 7 episodes for us? Because we haven't got the space on the servers for 12 episodes so that you can actually tell this story correctly. And then they went, you know what, yeah, we could probably get rid of episode 8, 9 and 10, and then we could probably force maybe half of episode 11 into half of episode 3, and what we'll do is we'll tell 3 stories all at once, and no one will have a clue what's going on. It kind of tells the story of a bunch of Americans finding a mythical island that they then end up with superpowers from. Which is another thing, though, linking back to this, which is something that top-ranking Nazis actually believed in, according to what I've been reading anyway. They were heavily influenced by a society known as the Thule Society, which I reckon is going to get its own show because it comes up a lot in different stuff that I listen to and read and look at. And Thule was, they wanted to find Thule, which some of them believed, the Thule Society seemed to believe that Thule itself was the birthplace of the Aryan race, or of the 5th root race, whatever that may be called. Now, which kind of implies that Thule must be part of the Hollow Earth, if that's the case. So Nazis must have believed in the Hollow Earth to a degree, because if Thule is where the Aryans come from, and they believed that at least the way to Thule was through the subterranean cities that were thought to exist in Tibet, then that means that they believed in Hollow Earth. So is mainstream media going to start to use Hollow Earth as a way to link more conspiracy theories to the Nazis, and that to be able to be like, well, if you think of Hollow Earth, then you must be into the Nazis kind of thing? I'm not sure. Now, anyway, they thought that by finding Thule, they'd be given telepathy, flight, and telekinesis as some form of weird reward, which is actually what happens in Jupiter's Legacy. Not to ruin anything, I kind of have ruined the series in a way, but I've not ruined the series. I believe whoever influenced the way that they were going to do the storytelling in that program ruined the series there. Now, it's another way, though, in the Jupiter's Legacy program, that seemingly Nazi beliefs have been assigned to Americans. And I know it's fiction, innit? I know it's made up, but it feels like it's trying, or someone's trying to retrospectively alter the beliefs of different nations. So rather than telling that story of that and saying this is what the Nazis were trying to do, the Nazis believed this, the Germans believed this, they make it out that it's the Americans that believed it in everything, in most things. Now, I know that a lot of it is made in America by Americans, so they're going to tie it to America, but it doesn't really make any sense, because American folklore has not got very much to do with like Germanic folklore, from my understanding of it. And a lot of the reasons why Germans and during Nazi rule, let's say, were easily persuaded, or maybe not easily persuaded, but eventually persuaded by the Nazis over the, I don't know, was it like an 8-year period before World War II, where the Nazis were fucking gaining power and that and influence. They were able to use Germanic folklore in order to sort of win people over. And that was kind of the thing with when we learned about a minute ago, well, about 10 minutes ago, about the werewolf partisan unit. You know, they kind of used the idea of the werewolf was seen in Germanic people as the werewolf was the good one, the vampire was the bad one. So they used that. They used all of that sort of mysticism, that sort of symbology, and that. Now, how can you take all of that and just sort of rehash it and tie Americans to it? There's a bit of it that doesn't make sense there. It's like someone's trying to tell us something, but I don't know what it is they're trying to tell us. Now, finding the magical tool, though, wasn't the only way that they reckoned they could get magical powers, though. The CIA were also experimenting with ESP, astral projection, psychic assassins, and weather prediction. Sorry, no. The Anunnaki were experimenting with weather prediction, ESP, astral projecting spies, archaeology, possibly, to perpetuate the lies of dinosaurs, or maybe to disprove the knowledge of dinosaurs at that time. We can't be too sure. But they were also trying to create or use psychic spies. But they were also looking externally too, so rather than looking just looking inwards, like modern day mindfulness coaches will try to make you do, which to me proves that mindfulness is a Nazi weapon and or technology. They were also looking all around the world for the spear of destiny, which is the spear that Longinus, the Roman, used to pierce Jesus' finely chiselled abs as he hung around on Golgotha Hill with a few criminals, that hill there, right, was also deemed to be associated with criminals, right, and Jesus received a slight incision there, right, and Jesus was the Son of God. So could that be why mosquito units are called mosquito units? For those of you that aren't aware of what mosquito units are, they're the anti-dispersion technology that are put outside of corner shops and that to keep teenagers away. Because if you think about it, a mosquito stabs its prey. I mean, albeit it then I think pisses into the blood, but it stabs its prey slightly, only a slight incision. And the mosquito units are made against children. I mean, I'm just looking for links, guys. I'm just asking questions. That's all I'm doing is just asking questions. Now, the Anunnaki, I can never remember how to say it. The Anunnaki, right? They were also looking for the Holy Grail, which people have recently seemed to have decided could actually be a specific bloodline or genetic code, which just seems like a new way to modernise a myth. No one's interested anymore, realistically, in jewel-encrusted chalices anymore. So, but if you mention blood or Jesus' blood to people, then you've got their attention. If you're there at a house party, and you're like, I've got this little chalice in my pocket. Do you wanna reach in and have a feel of me chalice? It's like the Holy Grail, mate. You've never seen anything like it. You've covered in jewels. It is. It's bedazzled in rubies, love. You're gonna like it. You're really gonna enjoy this. She's gonna look at you and be like, "The fuck you on about me? No, I don't want to touch your chalice. Why would you have a chalice? Well, what do you think you are, fucking King Arthur?" Yeah, if you're at a house party and you look to the girl beside you, you like the look of, and you're like, "Right, love, do you want to see me vial of blood?" And you raise your eyebrows ever so slightly, a couple of times, like Millhouse, and then you're like, "Oh, you do? What if I told you you could stick your hand in my pocket and you could have a good hard grab of a vial of Jesus' very blood itself?" She's in, mate. She's all in. She can't say no. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're in there. Anyway, let's have a song. This is ironically Little Weapon by Lupe Fiasco. I have found some experiments, though, that the Nazis supposedly conducted towards developing super soldiers, which is an experimental drug known as Dix, which is maybe another subtle nod towards Hitler being obsessed with men. It wasn't spelt as D-I-C-K-S, though. It was actually spelt D-I-X, with a space, or D-IX, let's say. So that could also, I guess, be D9 as well, because it could just be numerals. Maybe D is something in Roman numerals. If someone wants to tell me that in the Threshold chat now, in the live chat, what D is in Roman numerals, I may have looked it up by now. But anyway, it's fun to think, though, innit, that there was an evil Nazi scientist trying to put his dicks in as many Nazi soldiers as possible. Now, the drug was a mixture of cocaine, painkillers, and a few other bits, but it meant that soldiers could march for 80 miles straight without stopping. But you've also got to imagine and use your nouns in it to... The Nazis were fucking ruthless, mate, so they were probably just shooting all the soldiers that couldn't keep up with the march. Now, what's mental is they started using the drug on March 16th, 1944, and there's always that possibility that if they started using it sooner, they could have possibly won the war with a bunch of numb, coked up soldiers all coming, running at you on the Eastern Front or the streets of Paris. Sprachen Sie Deutsch? Wo ist meine Kuh? Wie alt bist du? Wie alt bist du? These weren't the only alleged super soldier projects, though. According to some Americans, they found a secret Nazi base which could have been trying to do something to make soldiers with metal bones. Again, Marvel links, adamantium anybody, vibranium anybody, unobtainium maybe, with Avatar, you know. There's a book somewhere out there by a bloke called Jeff Strasberg called The Secret Weapon of the Soviet, but apparently that book doesn't even exist. So I don't know if that's a censorship thing or someone's made up a backstory for an author who doesn't exist, along with a book that doesn't exist, and then taken quotes from that book that doesn't exist to spread lies about Soviet soldiers being dismembered by Nazi scientists and uncovering metallic rib cages. One thing found in a secret base, though, was behind a 5-foot block of bricks that were painted to be disguised as real rocks in a tunnel. Behind it, they found a load of stolen artwork, ancient relics, and the body of an old king called Frederick the Great, the bodies of a man called von Hindenburg and his missus, along with an oversized burial box engraved for Adolf Hitler. Now, it wasn't just a comically oversized sarcophagus for little Adie, though. Apparently, all of the death boxes behind that wall were oversized, so I'm not sure why that was, couldn't find that out. And for those of you wondering, because we're getting towards the end there, you know, like fucking Hindenburg was the leader of Germany up until 1934 after leading the German army during the First World War, so kind of makes sense why they would have maybe have kept him, I think. Anyway, I think I'm going to leave it there, guys. We've learnt some stuff, you know. I'll be back tomorrow with Jimmy Budd for Truth Seeking at 7. And later today, we've got HDR at 4 and Jimmy's on at 7 tonight. And ladies and gentlemen, introducing Gary.
Thanks for listening, man. If you enjoyed the show, give it a share online, you know, share it in your Instagram stories from Spotify, send it to a mate, talk about it on social media, tweet me, mate, tweet me. When I get 2,000 followers on Twitter, I'll be doing a taxidermy giveaway, so, you know, that's something for you, innit? That's a little something. At World Around You, same as the name of the show. I'll see you in a bit, mate.